Bible prophecy is active and unfolding daily. Zechariah 12, Isaiah 17, Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38. Here is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this week's newscast. There were all sorts of problems citing the new moon in Israel regarding Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets, last week. The Middle East had a sandstorm of biblical proportions, and in order for Yom Teruah to happen, the moon must not only be seen, but also has to be substantiated by 2 or 3 witnesses. Further, there was a double eclipse of the sun on September 13th. This is something that has never been seen before. Of course, it was only visible from Earth orbit. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory recorded the event, but just the same, it was seen. Well, it seems to me, my friends, that Elohim made a very clear statement about this Yom Teruah, pointing to the ancient catchphrase, "No one knows the day or the hour, only the Father." So many get worked up and over-emotional at times like this. There's a natural tendency in the flesh to want to know exactly when the Nechetef, the rapture, is going to happen. But as I always point out, we cannot own anything of Elohim's. And he makes that clear, especially with this event. Rather than spending hours watching to see when the Israelites are going to blow the shofar, that time would have been better spent working in the fields. The harvest is ripe, but the workers are few. So, the Nechetef did not occur last week. Hallelujah! That means we have more time to do the things through the Ruach, His Spirit, which will cause us to receive even greater eternal rewards when we do go home. During last week's Rosh Hashanah, as Jews around the world were prepared to celebrate the Jewish New Year, Palestinian terrorists once again used the holiday season to instigate riots on the Temple Mount and to launch terror attacks, which led to the murder of an Israeli citizen, Alexander Levlovich. Instead of condemning these acts, Mahmoud Abbas has chosen once again to fuel the fire in the most shameful manner, stating, "Al-Aqsa is ours, and so is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They have no right to desecrate them with their filthy feet. We don't allow them to do so, and we will do whatever we can to defend Jerusalem." Close quote. And then he praised Muslims who harass Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount. From Ynet News, the murder of Alexander Levlovich on Rosh Hashanah makes it very clear that stones and fire bombs are deadly weapons. Most rock throwers are between the ages of 10 and 20. The 14-year-olds and above have the strength to take a rock or heavy boulder, sometimes a block of concrete, and slam it into the windshield of a Jewish-driven car that passes by. 64-year-old Alexander Levlovich lost control of his car after it was struck by rocks thrown by Arabs in the Armon Hanetziv neighborhood, adjacent to the Arab village of Sur Bahir, while driving home from a Rosh Hashanah dinner. His 2 daughters, both in their 20s, were wounded in the crash. Rock attacks have become endemic in Jerusalem neighborhoods where Arab boys routinely target Jewish vehicles and homes. From the times of Israel, in 3 straight days of clashes on the Temple Mount, Israel police said dozens of Palestinian youths stayed overnight in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, preparing firebombs, rocks, fireworks, and other means to attack police and Jewish visitors to the holy site. Also from the times of Israel. Each night, teenagers from Jebel Mukhaber, the adjacent Arab village, pelt homes in Armon Hanatziv with firebombs, rocks, fireworks, and glass bottles filled with paint. Nava Segev, who has lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years, said the windows of her home have been broken multiple times. Her garden has been set on fire, and at night there are parts of her house that she must stay out of for fear of being hit by an incoming rock or bottle. Al-Hayat al-Jadida, the official Palestinian authority, daily has encouraged Palestinians to continue throwing rocks at Israelis and to defend and save the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. On Wednesday, it published a cartoon encouraging children to throw rocks. It appears, my friends, that these kinds of activities are not going to go away. And now, turning to wars and rumors of wars, on Tuesday, September 15th, dozens of Daesh, ISIS militants were killed in a day of coalition airstrikes and clashes with security forces in Iraq's Anbar province. Airstrikes by the U.S.-led coalition the previous Sunday destroyed a car bomb factory in Fallujah, killing an unknown number of the militants. And on Wednesday, September 16th, Australian aircraft have dropped bombs on ISIS targets in Syria for the first time. Defense Minister Kevin Andrews said, quote, "An Australian Hornet fighter aircraft destroyed a Daesh armored personnel carrier with a precision-guided missile. This is part of our logical extension in the fight against Daesh to operate not just over northern Iraq, but also to operate over eastern Syria in order to degrade and destroy the Daesh forces." Close quote. Iran released 5 senior al-Qaeda operatives and will soon allow them to leave the country, when they will undoubtedly join other terrorists in Syria planning attacks on the West. This is significant because these men are extremely dangerous and very experienced operatives with a proven track record in executing deadly terror attacks. From Sunday to Tuesday, Israeli security forces arrested 26 Palestinians and 14 Israeli police officers were injured. Saleh al-Arori, the commander of Hamas's Qassem brigades in the West Bank, was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department just last week for his role in organizing and inciting terrorism in the West Bank and Israel. And Turkish President Erdogan, who has long encouraged the international community to recognize Hamas as a legitimate political entity, has provided at least $300 million to Hamas, effectively sponsoring a U.S.-designated terrorist organization. Things keep getting crazier every day, my friends. More and more reports keep coming in saying that ISIS is sending trained jihadists undercover amongst migrant groups to attack targets in the West. In Germany, the intelligence community has concluded that ISIS-aligned agents have been meeting Middle East refugees as they arrive in the country. And in France, new intelligence reports are warning that ISIS increasingly aims to use European recruits to carry out attacks in France. This includes a new profile of jihadist recruits emerging from Europe. That is, those who travel to Syria for weapons training in order to commit attacks back in Europe. According to a survey of 1,365 Syrians conducted by UK-based ORB International from June 10th to July 2nd, 82% of Syrians believe the Islamic State was created by the United States and its allies. Then on Thursday, September 17th, from Haaretz, Palestinians pelted a Jerusalem city bus with rocks as it was driving through East Jerusalem's Ras al-Amud neighborhood on Thursday night. The driver fled, and when he returned with the police, they found the bus on fire. And in another incident Thursday night, a bus driver was lightly wounded by shattered glass after rocks were thrown at his vehicle near the Hizma checkpoint north of Jerusalem. And from the Times of Israel, 2 Palestinian men hurled firebombs at an Israeli car in the West Bank on Thursday night, causing the driver to lose control of the vehicle and overturn. But the woman driver was not harmed. Israeli security forces shot one of the perpetrators and a second man was arrested. The incident occurred near the Palestinian village of Beit Farouk, close to Nablus. From the Wall Street Journal, as Europe moves to take in large numbers of refugees, particularly from Syria, some other migrants, often Iraqis, Libyans, Palestinians, and Egyptians, are passing themselves off as Syrians. At Budapest's Keleti train station last week, Mahmoud, a Syrian from Aleppo, looked around at the new arrivals and, judging from their accents and dialects, he reckoned that little more than 10% were Syrian. An Arab bid to pressure Israel over its assumed nuclear arsenal failed on Thursday after Washington and other powers united to reject it at the UN Atomic Watchdog's annual gathering. 61 countries voted against the Arab-drafted resolution, 43 in favor and 33 abstained. With a larger number of no votes than a similar vote last year, the Israeli Prime Minister's office described the rejection of the motion as a great victory. Egyptian security forces killed 55 militants in Sinai on the 9th day of an operation against Islamists in the area. A statement by the military said that Operation Right of the Martyr had so far resulted in the killing of 415 militants and the arrest of 320 people. Then on Friday, September 18th, local forces in Syria, backed by popular defense forces, killed more than 100 al-Qaeda-linked militants during a series of violent clashes in the northwestern Syrian province of Idlib. There were 2 rocket attacks on the cities of Sderot and Ashkelon from Hamas in Gaza on Friday night, and just before midnight, an Iron Dome anti-rocket battery shot down a Gazan rocket over the southern city of Ashkelon. Warning sirens rang out across the city, sending residents fleeing for cover. And Egypt intensified its fight against the vast network of underground smuggling tunnels connecting Sinai and Gaza, flooding tunnels in the Rafah area with water pumped from the Mediterranean Sea, while people were still working in the tunnels. Then on Saturday, September 19th, the Israeli Air Force struck 3 terrorist infrastructure sites, including a Hamas-run telecommunications facility in the north of Gaza, early Saturday morning in response to multiple rocket attacks from the coastal enclave the previous day. From the Times of Israel, since the nuclear deal was signed, Iran has significantly increased its financial support for Hamas and Hezbollah. Hezbollah has received all the advanced weaponry that Syria has obtained from the Russians. And Moreover, Iran has decided to dispatch sizable forces to the Syrian front and is now focusing on building terror cells to fight Israel on the Golan Heights. Further, in the past 2 months, Iran has sent suitcases of cash, literally, to Hamas in Gaza. The Russian newspaper Gazeta.ru published interviews with Russian soldiers who refused to deploy to Syria because of their fear of ISIS. From Ynet News, while Hezbollah is deeply submerged in the Syrian quagmire, over the past year its leadership has been preparing for the Third Lebanon War, which will most likely begin with Hezbollah firing around 1,200 more accurate rockets per day, targeting civilians, military facilities, and essential services throughout Israel. Damage will be much smaller if the David's Sling missile defense system, designed to intercept missiles with a longer range than Iron Dome, is operative by then. Also, Hezbollah special forces are expected to cross into Israeli territory to conquer towns, kidnap hostages, and block major transportation arteries in the north, and also launch intensive barrages of mortar shells and short-range rockets to unleash mass death and destruction in Israeli border communities. Israel's response will likely be aimed at stopping Hezbollah's rocket fire and preventing infiltration into Israeli territory with a significant and speedy maneuvering of large IDF forces into Lebanese territory, and thousands of targets being hit throughout Lebanon for many days. The IDF is adding a defensive element through what is known as the obstacle. This is an artificial cliff being dug in the mountain slopes next to border communities. So, to sum up, aside from the final super blood moon next week on the 28th, we had a double eclipse of the sun last week. We saw Palestinian terrorists once again using the holiday season to instigate riots and to launch terror attacks, leading to the murder of innocent Israeli citizen Alexander Levlovich. Palestinian youth staying overnight in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, preparing firebombs, rocks, fireworks, and other means to attack police and Jewish visitors to the holy site. Teenagers from Jebel Mukhaber pelting homes in Armon Hanatziv with firebombs, rocks, fireworks, and glass bottles filled with paint. Palestinians pelting a Jerusalem city bus with rocks. A bus driver wounded by shattered glass after rocks were thrown at his vehicle. 2 Palestinian men hurling firebombs at an Israeli car in the West Bank. Dozens of ISIS militants killed in a day of coalition airstrikes and clashes with security forces in Iraq's Anbar province, including airstrikes by the U.S.-led coalition, destroying a car bomb factory and killing an unknown number of militants. Australian aircraft dropping bombs on ISIS targets in Syria for the very first time. Iran releasing 5 senior al-Qaeda operatives who will soon be joining other terrorists in Syria to plan attacks on the West. Turkish President Erdogan providing at least $300 million to Hamas, effectively sponsoring a U.S.-designated terrorist organization. ISIS sending trained jihadists undercover amongst migrant groups to attack targets in the West. A large number of refugees passing themselves off as Syrians to gain entry to the West. An Arab bid to pressure Israel over its assumed nuclear arsenal failing at the UN Atomic Watchdog's annual gathering. Fortunately, Egyptian security forces killing 55 militants on the 9th day of an operation against Islamists in Sinai. Local forces in Syria killing more than 100 al-Qaeda-linked militants in the northwestern Syrian province of Idlib. 2 rocket attacks on Israel from Hamas in Gaza. The Israeli Air Force striking 3 terrorist infrastructure sites, including a Hamas-run telecommunications facility in the north of Gaza. Hezbollah receiving all the advanced weaponry that Syria has obtained from the Russians. Iran dispatching sizable forces to the Syrian front and building terror cells to fight Israel on the Golan Heights. Russian soldiers refusing deployment to Syria because of their fear of ISIS. And Egypt flooding tunnels in the Rafah area of northeast Sinai and southern Israel. There's a lot going on in the news, more and more each week, my friends. The Shemitah cycle has ended. And that, combined with the 4th and final blood moon of the blood moon tetrad, a super lunar eclipse, seen over Israel next week on the 28th, means, I believe, that we will be seeing the beginning of many great judgments on planet Earth. We're already seeing everything escalating in the Middle East, and starting to in the Western countries, with ISIS beginning to spread its wings around the globe. But these things are only the very beginnings, whispers in the dark. The real events are about to begin. And that, my friends, is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Abba willing, I'll see you here again next week. Until then, stay safe. Shalom.
Crowded rooms, I need more space than I consume. Enough is time alone with you, underneath the naked moon, sharing confidential moods and making chatter. Mockingbird nocturnal sings notations of eternal things, entering the quantum breeze, flying not for want of wings. He lights his gaze on you and me, simply because we matter.